That was the point in the show where you're like, oh, Tony is a really bad guy. Like, he's likable, like I like him, he's great, but you just watch him shoot this kid, that's crying for his mommy, and obviously he's a little torn up about it afterwards. It's very telling of how beautiful that series is, and how it shows the dichotomy between, like, and I talk about this a lot in videos. There's a difference between someone who's an evil person and someone who does evil things. And Tony is like, he's skirting the lines, and that's what makes him so troubled. Is like, he's not quite an evil person, but he does do a lot of evil things. And it's just, that's one of the moments where you're like, damn, he's getting pretty close to being an evil person, and it's just tragic to watch him, another person go that far,
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Crime and Entertainment. I have here today a very, very interesting guest. I think we planned this interview like a couple months back. So I've been looking forward to this for a while. Shout out to George Peyrutin for setting this up. Please welcome Viola. How are you, my friend?
Thank you for having me. I'm doing good.
Now, I got to just jump right in here. Your channel, I think you got 850 something thousand subs last time I checked, or maybe that might be changed. But
just got over 850 a little while ago. Yeah.
So that's a great number. And your videos, some of them are long, some of them are short, but kind of give our audience a little primer, I guess, as to what you do, how you got into it, and then we'll start dissecting, some of these videos.
Cool. So I have always loved villains for some reason, ever since I was a kid. That's always been my focus. I never cared about the hero. I always cared about what the villain was doing. Those were my favorite characters. And back in 2019, I just finished watching Apocalypse Now, and I'm a big nerd for everything that I love. So, I love Game of Thrones, for example. So I'll watch a bunch of videos on Game of Thrones on YouTube. After watching Apocalypse Now, I looked up if there was any videos on Colonel Kurtz, and there really wasn't any. So I was like, well, maybe I'll give it a shot. I feel like I have a lot of things to say about him. And I also noticed that there wasn't really a channel dedicated to villains. So I was like, well, I could try that out and maybe make a channel centered around villains. So that's what got me started. And the whole idea behind it was to just kind of give people more information about what they're seeing, more information about the things they love, the characters they like, and diving into their backgrounds and understanding why they do what they do, and potentially bringing to light some information people might not have noticed or considered when watching or reading anything that I cover. And it's really just a deep dive into the characters that I cover in each episode, just to give people a broader idea of who they are, what they do, and why they do what they do. And how that relates to real life sometimes, if it's applicable,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because you've covered some, like, real-life people.
I've done a few real-life people that were from movies specifically. I still want to get into covering real people that don't appear in films and stuff. That takes so much time, because, when you look at a character from a movie, you got 2 hours or so of footage to go through, right? And their story. With a real person, you got however many years of life they've been alive to go through to figure out their whole story, Yeah,
a lot more.
So I've done a few couple. I've done like Amon Gert from Schindler's List, and I've done I talked a little bit about Tommy DeSimone, who's an inspiration for Tommy DeVito for Goodfellas. Yeah, so I've done a couple. Yeah.
I think what I was remember, I was listening to the podcast you did with Julian Dory, and you guys were discussing Ted Bundy. Right. So that's my fault. I apologize on that.
No problem.
I think that's it's fair to mention these aren't like reviews. These aren't like you're just reviewing this series and giving your opinion. Oh, it's good, and I really like this arc or whatever. This is a psychological breakdown of these people, like a very in-depth, like from, the most minute details that the average watcher will not pay attention to. So it's really in depth. One of the biggest ones that you have, and it's one of my, personal favorites, lengthwise, was on Tony Soprano. And from what I understand, that's your favorite TV show.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so mine as well. So I'm really going to enjoy kind of picking your brain on this. I probably watched that series at least 10 times, if not more.
Same.
Directly, I don't necessarily burn through every season straightforward, but I will go back and just kind of pick up in season 2. And then a lot of times I just get hooked and go forward. Or I'll go, in season 3 and watch Pine Barrens and I'll go forward.
Yeah.
I can watch that anytime and pick out something new that I've never seen.
Oh, yeah.
I've been watching that show for the years. And you also done one on Ralph Cifaretto, who was a, kind of combating a Tony in there. What drew you to do the one on Tony, and just how much of a process was that? Because, you mentioned this on the podcast with Julian, like, you're dissecting him, but at the same time in this show, although he's this brutal mob boss, he's getting dissected by a shrink in the show.
Right. Yeah. So it sounds funny when I say it to people, but so my dad is from Syria, and he pretty much learned to, I wouldn't say he learned to speak English, but he took a lot of his inspiration for speaking English from watching gangster movies. So my dad, he came from Syria and he came to Reno pretty much right away, but he talks like he's from New York because that's what he developed his English speaking accent around. And so him and my uncles, they were all like that. And I remember we had a lot of parties, like you see in The Sopranos, where, we got all these big families of aunts and uncles, which aren't really aunts and uncles, they're friends of the family and stuff. And so in a way, that was his favorite show too. And so I watched it when I was a teenager, and it's actually like nostalgic for me to watch The Sopranos, because I'm like, I remember, having those parties when I was a kid. So it's always been one of my favorite shows, and I know everybody else loves The Sopranos, who doesn't. So that was one of the earliest ones I wanted to tackle. But you're right, I didn't make it one of my first videos because, I think that was, at the time, that was the longest video I'd ever done. And that's because all those therapy sessions that he went through, I made sure to write them all down and note them down exactly what they talked about, just so I could completely understand his character and present everything that they went through. Because you're watching the show and you're watching these therapy sessions, but you're not necessarily taking all the information they discussed down and remembering it session to session. Oh yeah, they said that in session 3 in episode 4 back then. So I just wanted to make sure that it was really thorough with that one, and that's what made it so long, and makes The Sopranos so interesting, because when compared to other villains in their psychological profile, none of them are nearly as complete as Tony's, because you're watching him go through therapy and talking about, they're fleshing out his psychological profile in real time as you're watching it. So it was just, he's always been a fascinating character. It's always been one of my favorite shows, and that's why I made it a priority to cover him, sooner rather than later.
Do you remember, there's a specific scene I wanted to discuss with you, in that it's season 2. It's after him and Sal bumping Sarah. I don't want to get demonetized by saying the name that he went by on there this quick. Yeah, and you know who I'm referring to. They shot up Matthew Bevilaqua. He gets fingered, and he's almost like he's possibly facing a lengthy prison sentence. Then he gets free to that, and people realize who they were about to talk about, which was a hilarious scene in and of itself. She's like, "You had to be the big man.
You just had to do it, didn't you?" Yeah.
And he's sitting in his, I guess that's like a bathroom in the side of his house, and he starts to cry. Or at least it appears that he's crying. It looks like he's crying. And I think Melfi even mentions that she heard somebody crying in the next episode. That, to me, out of that whole series, outside of, he obviously had feelings and he cared for certain people, but that was the only time I ever saw like a vulnerability or a chink in the armor of who was Tony Soprano. Did you have any thoughts on that?
So yeah, that it's funny because that's like a moment where you do see a chink in Tony's armor, but I feel like that moment out of everything we'd seen him do so far up to that point, that was the point in the show where you're like, oh, Tony is a really bad guy. Like he's likable, like I like him, he's great, but you just watch him shoot this kid, that's crying for his mommy,
Yeah.
and obviously he's a little torn up about it afterwards. And it kind of goes it was like a how do I say this? So throughout the series we see that Tony has a lot of love for like innocent life. He loves animals, he likes little babies, and that's actually a component of certain types of disorders where the one in particular is like narcissistic personality disorder. It's where you are so absorbed with yourself that when you're interacting with people that you can't control, you tend to dislike them. But kids, they'll do whatever you say. Animals, they can't say no. So that's why they're so great in those kind of people's eyes. And him killing Matthew was like he kind of saw him as this innocent kid that he was killing, but also someone who had hurt his nephew, and he had to do it. So it was like a war between the one thing that he only revered really, which was like innocent life, and what he had to do. And it's a very hard, it's a damning moment for Tony, but it's also a very heartbreaking moment for him as well because yes, he murdered a kid and that should be condemned in the strongest possible way. But it's also horrifying to know that this man who could have been anything, has been pushed to this point where he's killing almost a child. Matthew's not a child, but close enough. Um, and it's just no, it's very telling of how beautiful that series is, and how it shows the dichotomy between like, and I talk about this a lot in videos. There's a difference between someone who's an evil person and someone who does evil things. And Tony is like he's skirting the lines, and that's what makes him so troubled. Is like he's not quite an evil person, but he does do a lot of evil things, and it's just that's one of the moments where you're like, damn, he's getting pretty close to being an evil person, and it's just tragic to watch another person go that far.
Yeah, because you're right on that. Like he has this passion. Some parts of it make you hate everything about him, even though he's still a likable and lovable character. Some parts of it make you hate him because he just picks on people. And, for instance, he just picked a fight with that driver, like right after he got out of hospital, because he knew he had to make a statement, thought he was kind of losing the locker room, so to speak. But then at the same time, he builds these ducks, a walkway into his pool. And, he was very passionate about Pyoma the horse. And, he wound up, unaliving one of his best associates because of it. And it's like he wanted to knock Ralphie off for a number of other things and had every right before that happened. But the horse was what sent him over.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Not the teenage girl. Well, I don't know if she was a teenager, but the young girl that he really got upset with him about, that he was about to take him out originally. Like that was bad to me. That's worse than the horse. Both of them are terrible.
Oh, sure. Yeah, definitely.
But it was the horse over the girl at the end of the day that he could not stand.
Yep. No, one of the things that's that it reminds me of Tony's character is like, as evil as a person becomes, and as much as you have to condemn them for what they've done, at the end of the day, they're still human, and it's a tragedy that they've become what they've become. It's sad to have seen that one of our brothers and sisters has fallen so far to where they become this person. And another thing is, inside every one of us was we used to be kids, innocent people who view the world in just the most innocent way possible. And in some ways, Tony is still a kid who views things and has sympathy for innocent things, but he's just too far gone. He proves over and over again that he's past the point of no return. And people, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen the show, and people speculate about the ending of the show all the time, how it ended so abruptly.
Oh, yeah.
But I think, in my mind, that ending was Tony getting shot, and that's just, it shows that no matter how much he tried to make his world work, it doesn't work, you know, and he was doomed to, you know, succumb to it eventually in one way or another. And it's very tragic.
What do you think drives the infidelity of Tony? Because by and large, Carmela was, I guess, be what you would consider what the term is today, a real one. I mean, she, you know, in the very first season, she's taking guns that he's handing out of the attic and jewelry and money. And, you know, she understands what's going on. She knows what she signed up for. And, but yet he has this on a bit, he doesn't have the ability to turn down. Well, I think he does once. The sales chick, after he got back with Carmela, he turned down the realtor lady that Christopher wound up sleeping with later on. And then there was a little rift between them two. Why do you think he was unable to show fidelity to Carmela?
So I think it's partly because it was part of his culture, you know, like everyone around him did that. And, you know, you saw with Bobby Bacala,
he was the only one that didn't.
The only one who didn't, and they made fun of him for it. You know what I mean? And Bobby took it in stride. I mean, he just was kind of their whipping boy, and he took it. But for most of the guys in that life, in the show at least, it was like a requirement. If you weren't doing it, then you're a pussy. It's pretty much, you know, the sentiment. And another component is just the power. You know, he could do it, so he did. You know, and that is one of Tony's things. He does whatever he wants. You know. And sometimes he thinks about how it affects other people, but most of the time it's just, you know, I can do it, so I'm going to do it. You know.
Well, in Bobby's case, I don't really know. That was an interesting take because they had already kind of written it in there that he didn't have a gumad, as they called it in the show. But then he starts dating the boss's daughter or sister, excuse me. So I don't know if that would even be allowed anyway. Like at that point, you know, I don't know. I don't know if he would be okay with that or not. I mean, they had already kind of established that baseline that's who he was.
Yeah, that's true. I wonder how Tony would have felt if he was cheating on Janice.
Because you know they're very protective of their own loved ones. I mean, he went and took out the Russians for kind of throwing her a beating after she stole the leg from Svetlana. So I mean, they're very protective of their own people. So that would have been an interesting choice to see how he would have handled that.
Yeah, for sure.
And the interesting part with him and Junior is like they're at odds seemingly through the whole thing. I mean, you have your peaks and valleys, but the one like most episode that would almost bring a tear to your eye is after they have that. And I think it's one of the most hilarious scenes in the whole series where they're at the dinner and he keeps making the varsity athlete reference.
Right.
And he tells them like, don't do it again. It's hurtful. It's undermining, which shows that he has feelings. This big tough guy that admits all this bravado has feelings that Junior's hurting. And then he says it again. He throws his fork down. He's like, son of a bitch. He gets up and me and my son have this kind of code. If I ever tell him to get up and get his coat, that means I'm ready to get to hell. I was like, get your coat. That means I'm ready to go. And he's like, I don't have a coat. He's like, to get moving. God damn it. I love that scene. But then later on at the end, he goes back to his house or his Junior's house, and he sits down and he looks at him and he's like, you know, why can't you say something good? And he goes, I mean, don't you love me? And then you see the tear come down Junior's eye. And it's like there's some sad moments in that series altogether, but that was one of the moments I think that everybody just had such a vulnerability aspect to him. And Junior especially. Like, do you think Tony, at the end of the day, I know he craved power, and I think he liked being feared, but he also wanted to be loved.
Oh, definitely.
Dangerous. A lot of times you can't get all of that. You know what I'm saying?
And Junior, I mean, it's revealed slowly over the course of the show, you know, that everybody always talks good about Johnny Boy Soprano and how great he was, you know. But as we go through the show more, we learn that Johnny Boy wasn't such a great dad. You know, he wasn't around often. When he was, it wasn't exactly positive. And Tony unleashes a lot of that in therapy. He finally realizes that his dad wasn't he might have been a great person to other people, but he wasn't a great dad. And Junior wasn't the perfect either, but in many ways, Junior was more of a father to Tony than Tony's dad was. So that's why those moments for Tony are so heartbreaking, because he in many ways, I assumed he saw Junior as his real father, you know?
Yeah. I would think so. I mean, because he was kind of close to him, and I mean, you can just tell there's a bond there because I guess his father's not in the picture. So that is who he would relate to as kind of this father figure, coming up in that life. Do you think there was ever any different avenue Tony could have took, or that he was just destined to be in that life?
So I don't think anyone is destined to do anything, but all of us are made by our environments, and to resist your environment is really hard for anybody, and if your environment is you're raised around a bunch of criminals and they're expecting you to become a criminal, well, chances are you're probably going to become a criminal, um, and some people resist that, the expectations imposed upon them by the people around them, but a lot of us don't. You end up becoming not a perfect image of what your parents or those around you want to be, but in a lot of ways you do um, become a person like they want you to be. And it's hard. And a lot of times, that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you live in a positive environment and your parents are pushing you to become a doctor, oh no, I became a doctor. You know what I mean? But if you're in a bad environment, then it is a problem. And it's incredibly hard to resist in a positive one, and probably more so in a negative environment. And so he did have a chance to become who he wanted to be, but he would have had to make that choice on his own. And it was a very hard choice for him to make on his own. It would have taken a lot of rebelling against everything around him to make his own way in the world. And so, yeah.
I think one of the most interesting relationships of that whole show is one that kind of flies under the radar, even though it's very evident. It kind of flies under the radar until season, I'd say 6A, if you want to call it that, is a relationship between him and his son, because I don't think he would have been the type that would have wanted his son to go into that life. But I think he also wanted his son to be a man's man, and he was the exact opposite of it. And like, I've interviewed probably about 9 people from that series on this channel. I've never been able to interview Robert Eiler, and I would love to, just for the simple fact of his character drove me nuts. Like, and that's the brilliance of writing. And then obviously you have to do your part as an actor to shine that through. But when a character can literally, as a viewer, make you cringe, they're doing a great job. Yeah. And it was like, he was just so not Tony that it's just like, why are you like this? And it was just, it was so whatever. And until the end, when he tries to, unalive himself and he jumps in the pool, you can see how much he cares about him and he wants them to be better. What do you think his outlook happened? And theoretically, if this show went on, what happens between their relationship?
I think that if the show had gone on, there would have been a point where AJ wouldn't have talked to his dad anymore. Like, probably would have just distanced himself from the family in any way that he could have.
Yeah.
And another thing that actually this ties into the whole like expectations of people around you. What makes those expectations even harder is like your nature. We're all born with certain traits and characteristics, and AJ did not have it in him to be the big macho man that Tony wanted him to be, and that's fine. Not all of us are like that. But Tony was in many ways trying to make AJ into what he wished he could have been,
Yeah.
He wanted to be a football star. He pushed AJ to be in football. He wanted him to be anything that he couldn't be when he was younger. He wanted AJ to be, and AJ wanted to be his own person. He didn't want to abide by everything his dad wanted him to be, and that upset Tony. And that is actually another component of not I think it's a component of narcissistic personality disorder, but they call it a narcissistic parent, and it ties back into the control aspect. Like, if a narcissistic parent loves their kids when they're young because they can control them, but as soon as they get older and they can't control them anymore, they start to like them less and less. So when AJ was young, he was daddy's little boy and he palled around with Tony and did whatever he said. But as he got older and started having his own opinions and figuring out what he wanted to do with his life, not what his dad wanted him to do with his life, Tony just naturally started to like him less and less because of that. Yeah.
And you saw a brief period when he was hanging out with the other kids that I think whose dad worked with Tony, and they were doing I don't know if they were doing the gambling, and they went to that party and they poured the acid on the kid's foot and he's screaming. You see AJ kind of look and smile like he's enjoying that. It kind of makes you think, all right, he's going to start like maybe liking the power, and then the infliction of pain on another person is going to give him pleasure, because he's not finding a whole lot of pleasure in life at this point. But then the writing and the dynamic of his character kind of shifted to the complete opposite of where he's caring about the environment. And, you know, I think at the end when they tell him Bobby, you know, gets shot, he's like, I was just starting to maintain. I mean, it's just such, like, you want to call it just being a little bitch. And Tony actually slaps him, I think, knocks him yanks him off the bed, and it's just really, really being rough. Why do you, I mean, it's like they teased it that it was going to start that way and then just yanked the covers from under you. Do you think that was on purpose?
Yeah, I think it was like a showing us that, you know, there's still some of Tony in AJ. You know, he still has that capacity to be like his dad, but at the end of the day, he is a very different person from his dad. And the whole, you know, AJ making you cringe thing, it's a lot of that has to do with how spoiled he is, you know. And
Yes.
it's funny that he dislikes that so much about his son, but he's the one who spoiled him. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And yeah, he was just starting to maintain. You know, AJ says that after his uncle dies, and it's like, okay, spoiled kid, your uncle just died. It's not about you having to
Yeah.
maintain anything right now. That, you know. So, no, I think it was just emphasizing how, like, AJ is just very different, and he was never going to be anything. He is twinges, but he's never going to be anything close to his dad, you know.
While we're on the Sopranos subject, and I'll move off of Tony for a minute, you did do an episode on Ralphie. Ralphie was probably one of the more popular, you know, combatants of Tony. Maybe Richie Aprile, I would say, might have been a little bit better, but Richie was unfortunately only around for one season. I think Ralphie lasted around two altogether. What do you think his driving way? He just seemed like he got, obviously he had a very interesting sexual satisfaction dynamic to him. But then as far as like inflicting pain, it didn't really matter who he inflicted pain on, be it women or, you know, whether it be emotional pain when he enjoyed watching Silvio smack the girl around when he come and got him out of his house. He was kind of smiling as Silvio was working her over. What do you think his overall makeup is?
So I don't remember exactly what I said in the video, but there was a few indicators, and they were very subtle indicators, given that Ralph's childhood wasn't the greatest and that his mom was probably very abusive. And so I think Ralph, and this comes out in his sexuality, is that Ralph equates violence and pain with love. So for him, doing those things is like the purest expression of joy. That's how he sees love. That's how he knows how to take pleasure out in life. And I imagine for a person like Ralph, life is so miserable most of the time that the only time when he's actually ecstatic is either when he's on drugs, which is giving him artificial happiness, or he's causing pain to other people or receiving pain, you know, as we saw in the bedroom. But Ralph is just a very, very corrupted individual, I would say. Like, his whole outlook on life was warped by what he experienced, and he's just inflicting that pain that he's always feeling back on others, you know.
Did he kill the horse?
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I'm sure he did, you know.
He never actually admits to it.
No, he doesn't.
He does say, I think the closest he comes is, I did not, but if I did, so what? That's really as close as you get to him admitting it.
Yeah. I would think he did, you know, and it would have been because Tony does mention during that interaction, he's like, did you use the same, I think he said, how's what's his face who did the arson at Vesuvio, you know? How's he been? And then Ralph's like, I don't know. And it's like, that's Tony probing. So it would have been interesting for, like, you know, maybe in a few episodes or the next season, there was like a 30-second moment where Tony encountered him and we got to the bottom of it. Hey, did you see Ralph? Oh yeah, we did that thing at the stable. That would have been nice confirmation. But I think he did. It seemed like a professional job, is what they were saying.
Yeah.
And Ralph certainly had a lot of motivation to do it. So,
oh yeah, I mean he's paying for everything out of pocket, giving Tony all this money. Tony's seemingly just kind of using him as a cash register. So I understood Ralph's point, at least on that. Not that he killed the horse, but I understand why he would want to get out of the situation, because he's paying all the money out for the upkeep. When he wins, he's paying everything to Tony, and he's kind of just like, what are you even contributing, to this whole situation? But I think that was something Sopranos as a whole got off on, as evident as the last episode, is the unknown. It always irks, I think, the average viewer, myself included, when you don't have closure.
Right.
So the perfect example is the episode I mentioned when we first started talking about this, is the Pine Barrens. Probably, for my money, the best episode out of the entire bunch.
Oh yeah, it got to be.
And you have no clue what happened to him.
And
I don't know if you've seen that episode. I don't know if it was David Chase or if it was Christopher and Bobby in their podcast. But they were saying that they were going to have a period of time to where they come back to Slava's office. Slava was the other Russian guy that guy worked for. And that Tony and Christopher was going to be together, and that the guy was going to be in there, but he was going to be so messed up in the head, like he couldn't talk. Like it was an accident where he couldn't talk, couldn't really move. And Christopher sees him. He sees Christopher. They lock eyes, but the guy can't really get out what he's got to get out. Now, I think it would have been cool. It was kind of like almost reminiscent of kind of Breaking Bad, the guy with the bell, kind of something similar along those lines. They can't get it out. But I think just the unknowing that in the end of it, David Chase gets off, I think, on leaving people hanging and not giving closure. Yeah. When most people think everybody's got to have closure. This movie's got to have closure. People have to know. And the brilliance of the ending, and we'll kind of hop off from there. The brilliance of that ending is, I think, because people fell in love with this family, fell in love with Tony, fell in love with these characters. That gives the viewer the option, or the availability rather, to make it whatever they want. You have expressed that you think it was him dying. I would tend to agree. But also it can be anything you want it to be, because no matter what he did, if he would have done something, it wouldn't have satisfied everybody.
No.
So now everybody just puts their own satisfaction on it.
Right. And in a lot of ways, an unsatisfying ending can be satisfying in that you can make it into whatever you want it to be. And plus, it's something that, regardless of what the ending was going to be, we'd probably still be talking about The Sopranos now, but that ending is something people talk about all the time to this day. It's one of the most famous endings in history. And I mean, you just brought up Breaking Bad. You can draw a parallel between the two, because how I see Breaking Bad is one of the reasons it's so popular is because it really is one of the greatest shows ever made. And it's one of the rare shows that not only is it good the whole way through, but it gets better and better as it goes. Yeah. Like a lot of times, like even for The Sopranos, personally, I say the last season is good, but it's not my favorite season. There was like, it was like, there was some things that I didn't particularly like, but Breaking Bad, it was just great the whole way through. And that ending, that resolution for Walter's story, perfect, very satisfying ending. I love that kind of ending, but I also love the unsatisfying ending of The Sopranos. Then it's a different story making ways to create a story, and both work equally well.
Yeah, when I got into I actually didn't get into Sopranos until season 3 was about to air on television. I didn't have HBO at the time. The box sets, which are only 4 discs back then, were damn near $100.
Oh yeah,
they were outrageously priced. And I actually found some in a pawn shop for $25 a piece. So I bought season 1, season 2, burned through them, was immediately hooked, which I love mob movies anyway. So I don't know why it took me so long to get on the train. But then after that, Sopranos and church were, Sunday nights. That's
there you go.
They went hand in hand. Walter, Breaking Bad, I think they were about to air the last season, and I'd never gotten into it. And my friend of mine kept saying, man, you need to do it. You need to do it. You'll like it. I know you'll like it. And so I went through the first season, and it was good, but it wasn't like I had to see it. So I went to the next season, and it got better. And then by the time Gus Fring enters the fold, I burned through every single episode and was like, at that point, I was holding off on what was being aired for the last season. And I mean, it's just so like, you can relate to these, even though they're doing these crazy things, you can relate to a man that knows that, you know, he's got cancer. He thinks his time's limited. So he's trying to do everything he can to provide for his family. It just so happens it puts him in the middle of all types of wild shit. And I think if somebody had the wherewithal to be able to do that, that's something that absolutely anybody would do. In my opinion, anyway.
Oh yeah. And the Sopranos and Breaking Bad, the thing they excel at in particular is you're rooting for the bad guy the whole way through, you know? And a lot of the time you're like, he's not that bad. But in retrospect, you look back and like, oh, he was bad, you know? He was, and that was something, you know, one of the things I actually, it was nice at the end of the Walter White video I did. I mentioned something that I think his name was Sonny in the Bronx Tale, right? Chaz Palminteri's character.
Yeah. Yep.
And Sonny said, or no, maybe not Sonny, maybe it was Robert De Niro's character who said it, but they said something along the lines of, you know, you think Sonny's a tough guy. A tough guy is a guy who wakes up every day and goes to work for his family. You know,
That was
the one who
Robert De
doesn't
Niro's
take
character,
the one who doesn't take the easy way out. And so at the end, you know, of the Breaking Bad video, I mentioned that quote. I was like, you know, Walter White at the beginning of the show, he was a tough guy. He was a tough guy who did everything he could for his family, and he translated that into doing something horrible for his family. But he was also someone who was dissatisfied with his lot in life. You know, he got cheated out of the company with Elliot. You know, that had been a thing for him forever. And to make himself into this big guy that he always wanted to be and felt he should have been is what transformed him from being the guy looking out for his family into a certified villain who's only doing this for himself, you know, which he admits at the end of the show. He said, you know, all of this I did for, and then Scarlett's like, don't tell me you did it for the family. I don't want to hear that again. He's like, I did it for myself. And it's like, there you go. That's everything about Walter's character right there. He did it all for himself, you know.
In that series, what do you think the switch was? Because you see from the start, he's this very timid chemist that obviously he's got this horrible news that he's got this disease that he's gonna, you know, eventually take him out. But he doesn't start off as Heisenberg. You know what I'm saying? No. That's an arc throughout the series. What point turned him, in your opinion?
So I would say it was when he found out that he was in remission. And that was the moment where, you know, he'd already made enough money to make his family secure. At that point, I think he was already working with Jesse to make even more money because he wanted them to be even more secure. But when he found out he was in remission, that was when he was presented with a choice, you know, either run away with what you've done, you know, and live a happy life with your family now that you've made all this money, or you can become that man, that big man that you always wanted to be. And at that moment, he was like, well, if I'm going to live longer, I'm going to make sure I become who I think I should be, which is this, you know, kingpin genius. I want Elliot's success. I want the success that was robbed of me. And that was the moment where he could have easily gone back into being the family man, but he chose not to, you know. Yeah.
My most favorite scene in that whole thing was when he's telling his wife, she's like, are we in danger? And he's like, you know, I think that's for me. I am the danger. I'm the one who knocks.
Yeah.
I mean, just the way he delivered that, you couldn't have done it any better. And I never watched Malcolm. I think it was Malcolm in the Middle, right? He was the dad in Malcolm in the Middle.
I watched, like, you know, I was a kid when it was on Nickelodeon, and I think that it was like on Nick at Night. So I'd watch episodes here and there, and yeah.
I never watched that. So this was my first experience ever seeing Bryan Cranston and just seeing that arc of, you know, Tony was essentially Tony through the whole thing. He was from season 1 to the end, you know, a little bit of change here and there, but by and large, he was the most same person. Walter had that, you know, that transformation from start to finish. And that's just so, I think you would have to put that on the actor as well, but it's like everything that brings them to that point. And that kind of brings me to one guy you haven't done, at least that I've seen, you haven't done on one guy, Sons of Anarchy. Have you done anything? You hadn't done Jack Steller yet.
Not yet. And I haven't seen it yet, but I have seen a lot of requests for it. So,
Yeah,
in fact, I think I would say that's probably one that I'm gonna do this coming year. I'll get into Sons of Anarchy. Yeah.
that was another one that you can see that arc because they, even though they're in a bad thing, Walter wasn't necessarily in a bad situation. He was in a bad, I guess you could say he was because he had cancer.
Right.
Jax was in the motorcycle group, but by the time it ends, he's what he wanted to do in his vision is totally twisted and flawed due to events throughout the series. And that's kind of the case with Walter. I mean, you get deeper in, the deeper you get, the seedier people you're dealing with, you have to become that ruthless person.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's for sure. And
really
it's
no way around it.
it's funny because you said Tony was Tony the whole way through, and that was Tony's problem. Is Tony could not stop being Tony, and that's what ended up being his downfall. Walter was a normal, regular guy in the beginning, but then he became Tony, and that was his downfall. So yeah.
Another one of my favorite characters, and there's a lot of crossover when you do watch Sons of Anarchy that you'll see, is Vic Mackey in the Shield.
Yeah. I did one on Vic. Yeah. Good series. Great show.
Really enjoyed that. Kurt Sutter, who was the writer on the Shield, he actually played, I don't know if you remember the guy Margos that was cutting off the feet.
Oh yeah.
And Vic shot him in the house. So that was the writer. He's the creator of Sons of Anarchy. He also got a part in it. A ton of people from the Shield star in Sons of Anarchy. So Claudette, Dutch, Aceveda. I mean, damn near all the main players show up at some point. Some roles are bigger than others.
Cool.
But his writing in that was great. And like I was talking with somebody one day and it was like, it's amazing how you were able to keep the audience because on the first episode, you're banking all your people to watch for Vic Mackey.
Yep.
And he shoots innocent police officer that's trying to do the right thing straight between the eyes on the very first episode, and yet he managed to still maintain the audience. How does that happen?
I think, we definitely have a morbid fascination with evil people. I wouldn't have a channel if we didn't, and I think one of the biggest things with the Shield, I think that was a great opener because I was like, whoa, he did this the first episode. What's happening next? Where's this going? Like, what's the development here? And they ended up expertly showing how a cop who was skirting the lines. He's kind of a dirty cop, but he's not really a dirty cop. He still does a lot of good things. In fact, one of the things you see him do a lot or a few times is you see him helping out kids and stuff in neighborhoods, poor neighborhoods and stuff like that. And it's a really great example of how it's really hard to skirt that line. And so one day, it was sooner rather than later, you're going to go over that line, probably. And Vic went over that line and showed that he was essentially more gangster than he was cop, Yeah. And that was a great show. Beautiful show. I loved it.
I loved it to death. I watched it from the very first episode. And then the arc, and I don't know if you did one. Did you do one on Shane too?
No, I just did Vic. Yeah.
Okay. So I think you mentioned Shane a bunch in that video. Shane's arc, and I heard Walton Goggins say this. He plays Shane Vendrell, that they disliked his character so much in the first season that they almost rewrote it or recasted him.
Oh, really?
The pundits at FX just disliked his character so much.
Interesting.
And if you rewatch that first episode, he's got this cringy line when they're about to go in to Two Times house or apartment where he does kill Terry Crowley. And they're saying, we're going to get him tonight. And he makes a line like, knock, knock, strike team, Mr. Drug Dealer. It's like these badass cops. And that's the best line you could come up with. Yeah. So it almost had like that AJ feel to it, I don't know.
Yeah.
And according to him, because that was the pilot episode, they had serious thoughts of recasting him. But by the time that thing ended, his character was just as impactful as Vic, as far as lasting impressions and what goes on. A lot of times it was like, I just want to see Vic and what he's got going on. These other storylines are good, but Vic's carrying it. By the end, Shane, I think I don't know if he was overtaking Vic, but he was right there.
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because it's like Shane was almost like a caricature in the beginning. You know, he's
Yeah,
just this. He's Vic's lapdog, this brown nosing good old boy that you're just like, oh, I hate this guy. Like he's just a piece of shit. You know.
yeah.
Sorry for swearing if I
Oh
don't.
no,
But
you're fine.
and by the end of the show, you know, he's got a great arc to where you're like, damn, I feel bad for Shane. This Shane's at it hard. He's at it rough. You know, I misjudged him. Poor bastard. You know. Yeah.
It's like he tried so hard to be Vic, but he just could not pull it off. I mean, like he learned under Vic. He
Hmm.
knew how Vic operated. He understood the nuances and how to play the game. He just couldn't pull it off. I mean, he
Yeah.
tries to get in bed with Antoine Mitchell's character, who was played brilliantly by Anthony Anderson. I don't
Hmm.
know if he's played very many roles that dark and sinister, where the first
I don't think
episode
he has.
you
Yeah.
you shoot a teenage girl,
Hmm.
kind of much like Vic did, right off the bat. He didn't shoot a girl, but an innocent bystander. Like he played that role fantastic. If I had to pick any role that he ever did, that's probably my favorite one. And he gets bound up as soon as he tries to get in bed with Antoine,
He
and then
gets.
it's just
Yeah.
it's bad from there on out.
Yeah. It's funny you mention him because when I saw him in that role, because for me, the first time I had seen him in anything was when I was a kid, and I saw this horrible. It's like considered one of the worst movies of all time now. But Kangaroo Jack. I don't know if you
Yeah,
remember Kangaroo
yeah,
Jack.
Kangaroo Jack. Yeah,
So I always remember him as the funny dude from Kangaroo Jack, you know. And I was like, whoa, look at this. The funny dude ain't so funny in this one. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, he had a lot of like Romeo Must Die. I think he was in that. He's always got this Big
Mhm.
Mama's House. He's always had that comedic element to him. And
Yeah.
like to me, when somebody nails a role, to me, they're always going to be that person.
Right. Yeah.
And to me, he's always Antoine Mitchell because
Yep.
he played it so good.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, Back to Vic for a minute. In season 2, I think it's season 2, where he
Mhm.
burns that guy's face on the stove.
Right. Hmm.
I can't remember his name right off the bat.
Yeah.
Armadillo Quintero.
Hmm. Hmm.
That was pushing limits for TV back then to a certain degree.
Right.
And he beat him with a book, I think, before he done that, before he put his face on the
Mhm.
stove. Do you think Vic was a serial killer that reined it in to do the good? I mean, because he did kill a good number of people. Do you think deep down he was a serial killer?
No. Um. So correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a minute since I watched the show, but it was L.A. this was set in, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and being a cop in LA is tough. You know, it just is. It has been for a long time. And I don't think he was a serial killer. I think it was just it was another example of he was probably a good cop in the beginning with great intentions, but as he saw more and more horrible things over the course of his career, he wanted to do something more about it. You know, if I can't beat him, might as well join him kind of attitude, you know. So I think I would assume Vic started out as a good person, like a genuinely good cop who was trying to do good, and he just realized that at some point he rationalized that he could do more good by being bad.
Yeah.
And so that's what he became. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, sometimes the people who he killed, it was out of, maybe love or revenge. I mean, and even though he was doing it to the wrong person, like he killed the guy Guardo Lima, whom he
Hmm.
thought was responsible for blowing up Lim. So in his mind, he's justifying that
Hmm.
killing for Lim's death.
Yeah.
He killed Margos, who was played by Kurt Sutter, that we
Hmm.
mentioned because he was the one that was hunting everybody, cutting off the feet,
Yeah.
for the money train robbery.
Hmm.
And that was a great arc in that. And I think that was in season 2. And I remember that the finale, they rob the money train, they get back, and all this money's laying on a table in like this bottom, like a stairwell thing. And he
Hmm.
comes running down there because he actually missed the robbery. I don't even think he was there for the robbery. He
Right.
comes after the fact to the rendezvous, and he
Hmm.
comes down there, and they've got that song playing, "I Am Overcome,"
Hmm.
and it's just like they just see all this money, and it's like he's so happy, he's patting him on the shoulder, and then it's just like a quietness sets
Hmm.
over the group because it's like you've got all the money in the world, your problems are solved, and it's like just as you realize that, you're
Hmm.
knowing that everything's fixing to go off the rails big time.
Hmm. Yeah.
What did you think about that?
I think that's what it's very indicative of that old phrase. careful what you wish for, you
Yeah.
know? And it also reminds me of The Dark Knight when the Joker says, I'm like a dog who's chasing after the car. I wouldn't know what to do with it once I caught it, but I love the chase, you know? And that's kind of what happened to Vic. He's like, he was in the chase and the chase and the chase, and he figured all his problems were going to be solved. And once he caught what he was after, it was kind of like, oh boy, what have I done? What now? Like I got it, now what? And yeah, that's one of the biggest problems with crime in general is like once you've got it, now what? Now what are you? And what are you going to do? What are you going to have to do to maintain this? What are you going to have to who are you going to have to kill?
Yeah.
What are you going to have to lie to? Are you going to have to steal? What's going to have to happen now? And he realized like he thought that was the moment it was over. His life is made. We're done. But then he also in that moment realized that oh no, it's just beginning,
Yeah.
And
'Cause nobody's going to let that amount of money go,
mhm,
just all willy nilly. And
yeah.
I think the storylines after that is, some of that money was marked. And
Mhm,
then, incidentally, Shane's girlfriend, Mara, who was another character that, you just couldn't stand. You wanted to wring her neck because she was just always putting her nose where it didn't belong. She kind of
right.
subsequently is the one that put the heat on him because she stole some money from the suitcase in the storage locker, spent
Mhm,
it. The money got flagged. So they knew that the money was still in LA.
yep.
And it kind of essentially put the heat down, which eventually leads to Shane, throwing the grenade up under Lem's car.
Mhm,
That one right there was one that really got me because I think that's the point Shane's character really began to shine through
mhm,
because, and I say that in his acting ability, not the actions that he did, but
right.
you seen that he did not want to do that, that he
Mhm,
genuinely felt that was the best thing for the group, even though he knew it was a horrible thing to do.
yeah. Um, no, Shane, Walton Goggins is a great actor,
Yes.
and he's come into his own over the last few years, especially. Like he's gotten a lot of recognition, and um, I didn't watch The Shield when it came out, so I don't know what all the opinions were on his performance then. But no, it is a testament to how great of an actor that Walton Goggins is, and it's funny because my first exposure to him was in Django
Yeah.
Unchained, and in there he's just like the most hateable, Southern slave owner, not slave owner, but assistant to the slave owner that you ever
Yeah.
seen. Um, but then the next time I saw him was in The Hateful Eight, um, and that was a great performance too.
Yeah.
He played a very, very. At first you hated him, and then you loved him. And then when I went back and finally watched The Shield, I was like, this reminded me so much of his performance in Hateful Eight, where in the beginning I was like, screw this guy, he sucks, hate him. And then as time went on, it was just like, wow, this is a great character, and this is a great performance. And you're right, that was one of the pivotal moments in the show where they made Shane into this giant of a character in the Shield,
Yeah.
and he's always going to be that.
Yeah, he became an equal to Vic as far as the importance of storyline,
Oh
in
yeah.
my opinion. I wanted to touch on the finales for both characters in retrospect. Shane eventually, the walls are closing in. He's on the run with his pregnant wife, his son. He knows that, it's just he's resorted to robbing convenience stores to
Hmm.
kind of keep himself afloat while breaking in and staying in abandoned houses.
Hmm.
He makes the decision to, I guess, essentially give his wife and kids something to drink that's poison. And then
Hmm.
he takes his own life in the bathroom before the cops come in because he knows they're coming in.
Hmm.
Psychologically, why does someone choose to do that over just turning themselves in? Because you've got to, and I don't want to jump too much off track, but you had so much of a similar situation with a professional wrestler, Chris Benoit,
Hmm.
who unalived his wife and son and then done the same thing to himself. What makes somebody want to do that to the family that they, I'm sure at some point loved and cherished, as opposed to just doing it to themselves if that's ultimately the goal? Why does the family need to go first?
It's this twisted. I don't know if I want to call it twisted, but like Shane, I'm sure he felt like, if they didn't go, their lives were going to be so much harder. So what he did to them, he saw as it was a mercy, like it's just downhill from here. They can't see it. I can see it. I can see that it's coming. And so to protect them, I'm going to get rid of them. And then, he could have turned himself in and let them live, but I assume that he just felt that like no matter what he did, their lives were always just going to be so much worse off for having been a part of what he did and from having known him. So he felt like that was the only choice he had to protect his loved ones. And then, of course, he wasn't going to be able to live with that guilt. And because as much as he wanted to do that for them, he didn't at the same time,
Yeah.
I don't want to say no one wants to kill their family because, there's plenty of people who do, but most people don't want to kill their loved ones. And even if they think it's the right thing to do for them. And no, it's a tragic thing to get pushed into a corner like that to where like you feel your only options and the best thing for you and your loved ones is to just not be here anymore,
Yeah. And I think if I'm not mistaken, Mara shot somebody.
Yes.
Shane was getting attacked and Mara shot somebody. So hypothetically, if you want to look at it, as Mara could possibly be going to jail.
Right. That was what it was. That was a part of it. Mara was going to be going to jail too. Yeah.
She's going to be going to jail while pregnant. So you got a kid that's going to be born with her in the penal system. The kid at that point is probably going to be going into foster homes.
Yeah.
So and he didn't want to do it brutally. Obviously, he wasn't a brutal guy to his family. So in the suicide note that Claudette reads is they didn't know what they were drinking. And then he has to make the decision to do that to himself. That was a hard, the whole show is, not necessarily what I found hard to watch, but it had some brutal elements to it. But that was definitely a hard scene to watch because I have a family and I have, a daughter and a son. And, to put yourself, you never know what you would do until you're in that situation. I would say, well, I would never do that. But now when you sit here and you break it down like you just did, and you think the cops are coming for you, there's no way around it. You're going to be doing a lot of time. Your wife's going to be doing a lot of time. And like I just said, your kid's going to be born in prison. The other kid's probably going to be joining, the foster system. I'm not saying that's the right option by any means, but you can see where someone would start to put that together in their mind.
Yeah. And ultimately, that's actually one of the things that I try to do in these videos is, and I don't know if I have this awesome ability or something. I'm sure most people can do this, but when I'm watching a villain in action, I understand what they're doing, and I'm like, I get it. I can feel that. I know why they do this, and I can feel the pleasure. I can understand it. And that is a big part of recognizing evil and understanding it more is to place yourself in another person's shoes.
Yeah.
And just really think about what would you do in that moment, and in that moment. That's one thing too, is in moments, it's really hard to think about what might be the right thing to do because you're presented with so many things that you got to make a decision. There's things coming at you. What are you going to do? And sometimes the thought pops into your head and you can't think of anything else that's better. And so you do it, which is tragic, but it's understandable, not excusable, but understandable. Yeah.
And Vic, that's kind of what happens with Vic. He gets the opportunity to get immunity, which I think is one of the best scenes in the series when he starts to tell everything that he's done. That girl that helped got him the deal, the female cop, she has no idea. He's breaking it down to her as, look, my team had to cut a few corners on the streets, nothing major, so she gets him a full immunity deal. And he just opens up with the story of he shot Detective Crowley just below the eye. Acevedo knew it. He couldn't prove it. Kavanaugh knew it. He couldn't prove it. I was too good. She's just like almost ready to stop it. And he's like, oh no. He's like, how much memory does that thing have? So he has to disclose, however many 5, 6, 7 seasons worth of just really horrible stuff. But in doing so, he's giving up the one guy that he has left in Ronnie. Do you think that was a hard decision for him to give up Ronnie, or was it the fact that Karim was going to be kept out of jail and he himself was not going to go to jail that overpowered the bonding of that friendship to hang Ronnie out to dry?
Oh yeah, I think in that moment he was more so concerned about himself and his family than he was his friend, you know. And I don't I'd say Vic had a lot of loyalty for his you know, his team.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't have wanted to do that. He didn't set out to hurt any of them, you know, except the guy he shot in the beginning. But that was a new guy, so you know, not really
Yeah.
part of the team.
He didn't have the tenure.
Yeah, exactly. But when it came down to it, when it was either me or my family or you, well, it's going to be you. And so Vic was a no-brainer for him, you know. I'm sure I want to say a no-brainer. I'm sure he had trouble coming to that conclusion, but when he realized that was what he had to do, he just did it, you know.
When they come and arrested Ronnie, I thought that was like a great line too, where he goes, you know, Dutch goes, "You're under arrest," and he's like, "For what?" And he's like, "The last 4 years."
Yeah. Yep. Oh yeah.
And I mean, he obviously is very upset and he flips out. And Vic gets the job that he was promised. And it's like you take this guy who thrives on the street, who thrives on violence, and you stick him behind a desk, a dress shirt, and he's staring out the window at the city that he used to be the man on. And he knows that his future is now behind this desk.
Yep.
To go past where the show ends, kind of like we did with the Sopranos, what happens to Vic? What does he do? Does this drive him to the brink of insanity? Because you would think that would somebody that thrives on that kind of action.
So the ending of The Shield is great for Vic's character because it's just like not only is he behind a desk and he's not doing what you know he's built to do, but he's behind that desk and he's got nothing. There's nobody left for him. You know, his wife hates him. She doesn't want anything to do with him. She's been trying to keep the kids away from him as much as she can. He's got no friends left. They're either in prison or they're dead. Nobody respects him anymore, and that's it. His life is that desk and going home to whatever apartment he lives in now. You know, repeat the cycle.
Yeah.
And when I remember correctly, at the end in that last scene, you hear police sirens, and then you see him. Did he take a gun out of a drawer when he got up? I don't remember.
I think he did. But it's like it's like his first instinct was to go, and then he's like, that's not my job anymore.
Yeah.
And
I think
it's a prison in a sense. He's doing a prison.
Yep.
Not behind bars per se, but you know, you take somebody that's used to doing that and you put them where they can see it, but they can't be involved in it. That's a really tough thing.
He's free, but he's not, you know?
Yes.
And I think what that indicated at the end with the sirens is that Vic's going to get himself in some trouble again, you know, and it's not over for him. That there's no way it can be because what has he got left to lose? You know, what's keeping him from going back out there and doing what he does best? You know.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Great series, man. I mean, I know that you know TV shows do have to wrap up, but you know the ones we've talked about thus far, I feel probably had a little bit more juice in the tank. But I know that's a slippery slope too because you don't want to run something dry to where it ruins the legacy of what you've filmed. Another character that's got an interesting arc, and I'm curious to your take on this. You done one on Tony Montana.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So for people that, you know, when I was coming up, I heard the movie referenced in movies before I seen the movie. I think I've seen the clips of it from New Jack City because the character Nino Brown is watching it.
Yeah.
And, you know, then you've heard, you know, multiple movies, you know, Say Hello to My Little Friend and all these sort of nods and, you know, appreciations to the movie. And I seen that movie when I was in high school. I think I might've been a freshman in high school and it's long, but I was immediately enamored with it. And you can see why it kind of became this cult phenomenon of people that chase the American dream, come from the gutter, go to the top. And then ultimately you see that, you know, there's a price to be paid, you know, with that lifestyle.
Yeah.
What do you think was Tony's driving force? Was it money? Was it power? I mean, he kind of breaks it down in the car when he's talking to Manny. He's like, first you get the money, then you get the power, then you get the girl. Do you think that was accurate? Do you think that was his strict, you know, the code that he wanted?
And it was. And a lot of I think what that movie explains very brilliantly is, Tony came from Cuba, communist Cuba, and he lived a life of poverty. We assume, that's
Yeah.
as much as he says. Um, and I don't know how far away Cuba is, like 50 miles away from Florida, right? So
Yeah,
50
it's
miles away,
not very far.
yeah, is the American dream, is the paradise, where you can make your life and anything you want it to be. So his drive was to get that American dream, but and this is the tragedy. He thought that the only way to do that was to enter into a life of crime. Do whatever it took to get the money as fast and quickly as he possibly could. And that's probably the biggest pitfall that draws people into criminal lifestyles is they think that that's the only way. You know, it's not the only way. It's the quickest way. That's for sure. You're going to make a lot of money real quick, but it's not the only way. And it's not the way that's going to make you live a long life. I don't know what the exact statistic would be, but I would feel comfortable in saying that 95% of criminals don't have a happy ending. Either you end up in a grave or you end up in jail. And that's, the very few who die of old age in their bed.
Yeah.
Um,
John Gotti makes that reference. And I think it's the movie that wasn't really all that great, but the one where Travolta played him in the very opening. He's like, guys like me, we usually end up in two places, dead or in jail.
yeah.
Like in my case, I did both.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's really what it was. It was Tony's desire to live the American dream and his warped view of how to get that dream. And it led to his downfall. And something interesting about that movie, it's a very quick moment, and a lot of other films do it in a more like in your face way. But something I talked about in the video I did on him is how crime, it doesn't just affect the people that you're committing crimes against, but it affects innocent people as well. Because there's that scene where he's getting assassinated, where there's assassination attempt at the Babylon Club.
Yes.
And when they're shooting at him and he's escaping, the guy who was dancing with that mask on the stage, he takes a bullet and he dies.
Yeah.
He wouldn't have died if Tony wasn't a criminal and if people didn't come to assassinate him that night. So as a result of Tony, it's not his direct fault, but because Tony is who he is and was doing what he did, that situation happened and an innocent person lost their life.
Yeah.
So that movie's great in so many ways, so many big and small ways.
And I argue with some coworkers of mine about this fact for a long time. And I guess I'm just one of those people that hates to admit when they're wrong, but I might've been wrong because as I watch that movie now, it seems like it jumps off the page a little bit more. Did Tony have a sexual attraction to his own sister?
That's so hard to. I would say yeah, and it actually, now that you bring it up again, it reminds me of, have you ever heard stories of like kids who their parents gave up, they were adopted, and then like they meet them when they're 25 and then they enter into like a relationship with them? Have you ever heard of stories like that?
Oh, with their
It's
parents?
Yeah, it's very rare, but there are times where like a daughter, right? She meets her dad for the first time, and because he is her dad, but not really. And so there's this weird attraction that I guess we all have to the people who are like, they're related to us, especially when you learn that, like just seeing them on the street, if they didn't know they were your cousin, you're probably not going to have anything. But as soon as you like learn that they are a part of you and they're so closely related to you, some people, that attraction goes to the next level. It becomes a romantic attraction. And so that makes me think for Tony's situation, if I remember correctly, he hadn't seen his sister since she was a kid. She was just a little girl. And then when he sees her as an adult, she's this beautiful full-grown woman. And you see that when he sees her for the first time, it's like just a stare, like a 1,000-yard stare. And so I think actually it's kind of one of those situations where she is his sister, but he remembers his sister is this little girl. And now in front of him is this beautiful full-grown woman. Yeah. So I think on a subconscious level, he was attracted to her.
Yeah.
And that's why he was so upset with Manny when he found out, which is interesting because you would think that out of all the people you'd want, I know he wanted what's best for his sister. He didn't want her to be with anyone in the life. But if she was going to be with anyone in the life, he'd want her to be your, best friend, right?
Right hand man. And
Yeah.
I think he roughed up a guy that was with her in the stall about midway through the movie, a guy that
Mhm.
was messing around with in the bathroom
Yep.
stall.
Mhm.
But the thing that really kind of drives that home, and I never thought about that because the ending scene is so overpowered by him and the shotgun, or him and the grenade launchers and say hello to my little friend and all that.
Mhm.
You lose track of, before that began, he actually gets shot by his sister because she's so
Yep.
distraught over Manny's death. And she comes in and she's got the robe and it's
Mhm.
open, and there's a little bit of nudity going on. She's like,
Mhm.
she says, "Do you want to fuck me, Tony? Like, you
Mhm.
don't want anyone else to have me. You want to have me."
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
that is like kind of, and he even says, he's like, "What you talking crazy?" I mean, like,
Mhm.
so he's
Yeah.
throwing it off, but at the same time, you get her logic. It's like, you don't want anybody else to have me. Is that do you want me? Is that
Mhm.
it? And that was kind of their argument back then. And I never really thought like that much about that part because I was
Mhm.
just so overtaken by the rest of the movie.
Oh
But now
yeah.
that I look back on it, that is kind of a thing that sticks out. So you can see why that was
Mhm.
something there. And it very well could be subconsciously. I think he might have had something for her because
Yeah.
whatever he had was so powerful that he took out his A1 from day one.
Mhm. Yeah. No, could be for sure. Like I think there's something there. That seems like there has to be.
You and while we're kind of on the gangster topic, you did say you covered Tommy DeSimone, that
Yeah.
was kind of portrayed by Joe Pesci in Goodfellas. It was I think that was his name in the Goodfellas. That was Tommy DeSimone was his real name.
His name, yeah, in Goodfellas, Tommy DeVito.
Yeah, Tommy DeVito.
Yeah.
Um, what did you do for research on that one outside of the Goodfellas?
So if I remember right, because that was one of my earliest videos, um, and I want to say earliest, but it was pretty early, and at that time there might be more information now, but there really wasn't that much information on Tommy DeSimone's life because
Right.
he wasn't that big of a figure in the mob. He was just a soldier, um, and there's a lot of information about bosses and stuff, but there's not so much information about soldiers, especially one that died young.
Yeah.
In the 80s. Who's going to keep a whole record of his every little thing in his life? Um, I think what I learned about Tommy DeSimone is that he was even like to his mobster friends, he was a bad dude. Like even to other criminals, it was like this guy's bad. So.
That's on the side of
Um, And I remember someone messaging me. One of my viewers messaged me afterwards, said they knew him, that they like their mom knew him or knew someone he dated, and was telling me about how he was like horribly abusive to this girl and was like threatening to kill her and stuff. And I don't remember exactly. It's been a long time since I talked to that person. But yeah, no, Tommy. From what I could gather, Tommy was bad for a criminal, like so bad that other criminals like this guy's got to go. Yeah.
Yeah, I've talked to a lot of guys on this show that are from that life,
Hmm.
and not actually from that life. Guys who knew Tommy. There's a guy named Anthony Ruggiano who in the movie Goodfellas, when they're doing that famous scene where they're talking about this person, this is Mo Black's brother, Fat Andy, Jimmy Two Tie, whatever. Mo Black's brother, Fat Andy, is reference to a guy named Andy Ruggiano, who was kind of the somewhat mentor, I guess you would say, to John Gotti, him and Anil Delacroce, and Anthony Ruggiano Jr. was his son. So he grew up with Tommy and Henry Hill and a
Hmm.
lot of those guys with the Gambinos. Anthony himself never got made because he had a drug problem that kind of prevented that ever from happening. But he would
Hmm.
say he would be going out with him, and he was just always getting into some shit. And his dad would tell him, like, you got to stay away from that kid. Like, he's
Hmm.
crazy. He's going to get you killed.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, for gangsters and tough and criminals to be warning other people of you and what better watch out for that guy. He's going to get you in trouble. Meanwhile, you probably just killed somebody earlier, but
Hmm.
that guy's going to get you in trouble. That's another level of brutal.
Oh yeah. And it's funny. You just mentioned the scene in Goodfellas at the club when they're going through all the people. Actually, so there was this corrupt New York detective I think he was the detective. His name is
That's
Louis
him.
Polito.
Yeah.
That was the guy. The one you're talking about. Okay, I thought so. I was like,
Yeah,
what?
he's the guy that's sitting there when he said this is Mo Black's brother, Fat Andy. And I think he goes, "Hey, how are you?" That's Louis Polito. Yeah.
Louis Polito. Okay. My mom, her best friend, since she unfortunately passed away a little while ago, but they were best friends since they were 12. And my mom grew up in Covina in LA, California.
Yeah.
And but she came from New York, and she was an Italian girl from New York. They had moved out to LA. And her mom, she was Louis's godmother. So Louis used to send her letters from prison up until she died. And I don't know if I can get my hands on them, but yeah, it was an interesting little fact. You know, I actually know Louis Ippolito's godmother. She babysat me when I was a kid. So yeah.
And you know, he got caught because of, I guess you could say, his ego, because he was on a talk show and somebody recognized him from the talk show as the guy that he was doing hits with, Stephen Caracappa. They recognized him from a guy that got murdered in a car after they pulled him over. And so basically they were working for a guy named Anthony Gaspipe Casso.
Oh, I've heard that name.
Yeah, essentially and he was a homicidal maniac himself.
Yeah.
You know, essentially taking out, you know, you got these two cops that are on the tape essentially doing hits, and who's not going to pull over for a policeman? You're less reluctant to pull over for, you know, two guys in a Cadillac that are trying to get you to pull over, but who's not going to stop a policeman? And he was recognized. I think by that time he might have already been retired. I'm not sure, but he was recognized by a lady at the scene of a crime, and that kind of led to both of them being arrested. And I keep hearing that there's rumblings that they're going to be doing TV shows about him called the Mafia Cops. If they did, I think that would be really fascinating because you get the criminal side and the, you know, the police side to it.
Yeah, that would be interesting for sure.
So I want to hop over, change genres for a minute, because hands down my two favorite genres of movies are gangster movies and horror movies. Okay. And you've covered quite a few horror movie people.
I have. Yeah.
Which is your favorite out of everybody that you've covered?
So now the favorite character I've covered was probably Pinhead. And when I covered him originally, I just did the first three movies because how familiar are you with the Hellraiser franchise?
I'll be honest with you. I watched the first two. I never really followed up on anything after that.
So three's all right. The rest of them are garbage. They're horrible movies. Like
I haven't even watched the most recent one. I think
that one was actually pretty good. Like I was impressed. It was good. It was a nice change of pace because ever since three, they were all trash. And so I only did the first three when I did it, but back when I was first making videos, I still had a full-time job. So I wasn't like going as in depth as I do now. You know, now if I watch a movie and that movie it was based on a book, I'll read the book too. You know, back then I just did the movie. And Hellraiser, I was like, well, the other one sucks, so I'm only going to do the first three. And then last year I decided to remaster that episode, and I did all the movies. Plus Hellraiser has a bunch of like comic books. And Clive Barker even wrote a book called The Scarlet Gospels, which is set in that universe. And just going through all the lore for Pinhead, really cool stuff. Like I loved Pinhead's lore. So character, Pinhead, but and I was surprised that this was my favorite movie because I think my mom, she's a very opinionated woman. And so she always told me that Texas Chainsaw Massacre was just garbage. Like it was just a slasher movie, and she doesn't like slashers, so you know whatever. And then my first go of doing Halloween, because for October I try to do like all the whole month with horror villains.
Right.
And so I decided I'll do Texas Chainsaw Massacre. That movie is my favorite horror movie of all time. That movie is so good, and it's just the cinematography, the score, the acting, like it's a perfect horror movie in my opinion. And not many things like I have a pretty I don't know what's the word. Not much scares me, you know.
Right.
And that movie creeped me out when I first watched it. I was like, "Ooh, this is a good movie," you know. And Leatherface is actually I consider him next to HAL 9000 from 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
To be the least evil character that I've covered, because Leatherface, compared to a lot of other slasher villains, he had no choice. in becoming what he is. You know, he's clearly mentally handicapped.
Yeah.
And he was just raised by this crazy family,
Yeah,
and he
this is
became
the
this
right
big
thing to
brute.
do. Yeah.
You know, and it's not his fault that he is who he is. But yeah, Texas Chainsaw Massacre is great. I love that movie.
Yeah, and it's odd because like you say, he's probably one of the most brutal in the way. Like of all the ways to go, like I'd much rather have Jason snap my neck off than to have somebody go at me with a chainsaw.
Mm-hmm.
And just speaking of it from a movie standpoint, outside of a character standpoint, that movie was so great, and they were on such of a shoestring budget. Like you really don't see a ton of blood in that movie.
No, yeah.
Is when you stop and think about it, your mind makes you think there's a lot of blood and a lot of gore going on. Not even a whole lot of kills, to be quite honest. But the way they did it and the way Tobe Hooper did it was brilliant. And I don't know if you're familiar with the story, but he says he come up with the concept of it as he was in a Sears or something like that, and he said it was like all these people. He just wanted to get in and get the hell out, and he's just sitting there, and he said he just glances at the bottom shelf and he sees this chainsaw.
Mm-hmm.
So he was like, I bet if I just crank that fucker up right there and let it eat, you know, people would just get out of here. And that was kind of the bubble that grew into what we have as Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Did you base that off just the first film solely? Did you do any sort of, I guess, balancing with the rest of the films? And did you watch all the rest of the films? So it was a good many.
So I plan on remastering that video too, because I only did the first and the second one. Because I think when I look at characters to cover, I look at everything that's canon, to them. And horror movies, especially the early ones, there's like Halloween, for example, there's like 4 different timelines because there's like the first and the second movie are their own timeline, and then 1 through 1 and the 3 is in its own timeline, and then 1, 2, and 4, 5, and 6 are in their own timeline, and the Rob Zombie one, so like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the first and the second one are like considered, direct sequels to one another, and then the other ones they kind of branch off. So at the time, I haven't seen any other ones. I've only seen the first and the second. So yeah, the first 2 Texas Chainsaw Massacres.
So with the second one, what did you think? Did you watch them back to back, or did you watch the one prior to the 2? Or I don't know I'm not trying to aid you, but
oh no, I watched 1 and 2 back to back. Yeah.
So that's a very different contrast in movies.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
First one, there was absolutely no humor in it whatsoever.
Right.
The second one, often wondered, like as a kid, that opener to start with, now I realize how ridiculous it is that somebody could drive backwards that fast on that bridge. But to me, that opener was the coolest thing in the world.
Oh yeah, I bet.
With Chop Top coming to the radio station, he's creeped the hell out of me, just watching that. But then after that, the movie just takes this, it's like a roller coaster. It's wild, it's crazy. In some ways, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. In some ways, it does. It's a very kind of like, now that movie makes more sense in today's times than I think it did back then, especially when I watched it as a young kid. But what did you think of watching 1 where it's just no comedy whatsoever, dark comedy, horror, scare the shit out of you, this guy's a bad dude, to 2 where he's still got that same vulnerability aspect. He's still in this family where they're kind of controlling him, so to speak, because he essentially is a child, but with the comedic, tones to it. What did you think about? Was there a difference too much in the characters for you? What was your thoughts on that?
From what I remember, it was just a continuation of Leatherface's character, showing how he didn't really have much agency. It was what he did was ruled by his family.
Yeah.
As far as the shift goes, 2's fun. It's a fun movie. It was just a weird sequel. That's all.
Yeah, very fun. I think Hopper said he made like more money on that film than he did everything that he did the whole rest of the year.
Wow.
I don't know how much they paid him back then, but I rewatched that movie about 2 weeks ago. Just because I seen the clip, I think of it was when Chop Top was in the radio station, and I actually got a chance to meet Bill Moseley. He come here to Charleston where I was at for a like a horror con, and I got a chance to meet him and talk to him and just told him how much of an impact like that role had on me all these years later. I got a chance to meet Doug Bradley also.
Oh, nice.
Super nice guy. Cool. And I went back and rewatched it. And it's like, yeah, it definitely was not as good as one, but it seemed like Toby wanted to. He was pushed to do a sequel, but he also wanted to probably go in a different direction. So he used the tone and the characters, but made just a completely off the wall movie. But it still works. I mean, it's still fun to watch.
Oh, yeah.
It's just you're not gonna get what you got from two the same thing you got from one.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of people who make a story, typically they want to continue that story, and
Yeah.
in a way that you would expect them to,
Yes.
you know. Um, and I'm sure studio executives wanted him to continue it in a way you'd expect him to. But I think that was one of the rare moments where an artist was like, "I'm doing what I want. This movie's going to be what I want it to be, and that's what you're getting." And so, on that level, that's really cool. Like that he was just like, "No, I don't care. I don't care if you want Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 to be, in their house again, or something. It's going to be what I want it to be. It's going to be a black comedy. Deal with it.
The grandpa in there was great in part two.
Mhm.
I mean, he was just, hot damn you son of a bitch. Is that the American way of entering a man's home singing like that? I mean, it was just, it got chuckles out of me still,
Oh,
like
yeah.
even today. Like it's just, it's very, very, it's an entertaining movie. And I think Chop Top really jumps off the screen in that one. That kind of sent him into his own and a stratosphere. Did you see 3 at all?
I have not yet. No.
Okay. So it's worth a watch. You got some guys that are going to have great careers. Viggo Mortensen's in it.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's part of the family. It's part of the Hewitt family.
He's one of my favorite actors.
Yeah, this is obviously earlier on in his career. One
Mhm.
of the first times I had seen him in anything. And also Ken Foree, I think is his name. He was in a lot of the House of a Thousand Corpses.
Oh, yeah. I'm gonna look him up real quick. Ken Foree.
Yeah. He was also in Dawn of the Dead, the original. He was the
Yeah, Ken Foree. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
He was the main character. I guess you could say main character in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3.
Okay.
So it's definitely not the best one,
Mhm.
but that's when you kind of really start to see the kid version of it, because there's a scene where Leatherface is using one of those speaking spells.
Mhm.
And it shows a picture of a girl, and it's like, what is this? And obviously you're supposed to type girl, and he keeps typing food. And so it says, that's the wrong answer. And after 2 times of doing that, he like slams his hand down on the thing. And you can tell he's got and especially in 2, like he's got the feelings of a man, because he don't want to kill Stretch. He's attracted to her.
Yeah.
And he's kind of keeping that. He kept her alive because I think he maybe had some sort of deep fascination of somewhat of a relationship as to keeping her or something. What do you think of that?
Yeah. From what I remember, I think she was one of the few people who showed him tenderness. Is that kind of
kind of that? And she was reluctant to show fear. That's what Dennis Hopper character Lefty said. They live on fear. They thrive on fear. So he said, I ain't got nothing left. And so she kept repeating that to herself. They live on fear. They live on fear. And it's like when he was about to do it, she was like, no. And it was just like she kind of took herself out of the screaming. That was kind of what I guess was the satisfaction. And then when she became like more, like you said, tenderness and almost of a I don't know if it was a parental figure or a love interest. I don't really know what he's seen in her.
I don't know exactly what he saw in her, but I would assume it was just that was probably the first time or one of the first times Leatherface has met a person outside of his family who interacted with him in a positive way, you know, because everyone else outside of his family that just kill and eat, so that was probably the first time he'd actually had a person see him not as a monster and actually try and talk to him rather than running away from his chainsaw, so it was like, whoa.
And until you get to, I forgot what number it was, but it was the one that they did later on in 3D. It was one of the first times he had ever showed mercy to somebody. In that film, he actually winds up realizing he's related to one of the characters. So he doesn't kill her. He winds up kind of helping her towards the end. Did you watch the more recent one on Netflix?
No, I haven't seen them. I haven't seen any of them. Yeah.
You said you could possibly be remastering that. If you did, would you do a deeper dive in using the other films?
Yep. I do all the movies. Yeah.
I mean, I guess you would have to put New Generation in there, but that movie is very much standalone.
Is it bad?
It's bad, but the thing about it is it's got great actors in it. It's got Matthew McConaughey in it. It's got Renee Zellweger in it.
That's the thing with all horror franchises. I mean, lately they've been doing a pretty good job, but especially back in the day, there was like one or two good ones, and then seemed like there was a string of like 3 or 4 shit ones. They suck, and they don't need to exist, but they do. So,
and the thing was, they actually shot that movie earlier in their careers, and it got shelved, but due to financing and other things. Then by the time their star started rising, I think Renee had done Jerry Maguire. Matthew had done quite a few things. So their box office draw was there. So they were going to put it out. And from what I understand, McConaughey, Zellweger both like tried to offer the studio enough money just to can the damn thing. Like, you're going to make this much money. We'll give you, $1 million more. Just fucking burn it. Forget it existed. Because that's the one where they essentially made Leatherface into a cross-dresser. Dressing up like a woman. If you've seen those clips here and there.
I have not, actually.
And it just really like devalued the character, in my opinion. So much. I mean, it's worth watching because of how bad it is, if that makes any sense. And if you want to incorporate that in an episode,
sure.
Definitely not worth doing anything with as far as a deep dive. When
I do cover those the ones that aren't as good, typically I don't go like too in detail with them, but I'll watch them just in case there's like some minor lore thing that I need to incorporate. Like if you learn that Leatherface, something about his backstory that's important that I need to talk about, and I'll just like quickly gloss over, be like, he killed this person and this one, and that's add that to the body count. But other than that, let's not talk about it.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Have you seen the Terrifier movies?
Yes.
I hadn't seen him until I just did a video on Art the Clown, and that third one was the most brutal thing I have ever seen in my life. Like, that was crazy.
So I haven't watched the third one yet, but I did put it on the other night, and I watched about the first 15 minutes, and it was insane. Yeah. And I kept seeing these articles where it was like people were throwing up, and David Howard Thornton, who I'm not a big fan of personally, but the character's fine. I can separate the two. He even said that like he got sick filming some of the stuff that they were doing. And that first 15 minutes, like I said, that's all I've been able to watch because my wife can't stand movies like that. So between the podcast and everything else, my time to watch things like that are limited, and it's usually late at night.
Yeah.
It was very, very brutal. I agree. Yeah. So I can imagine it doesn't get much better. But even the first two, I mean, you got a person sawed in half.
Yeah.
You got that scene where they walk in and he's, pretty much dismembered that girl sitting in the bed playing with it.
Yeah.
And that's the beautiful thing about horror is you can create that. And David Howard Thornton essentially doesn't say a word and scares the shit out of you.
Yeah. And no, I was telling my fiance, I was like, this, because she used to like horror stuff, but her stomach's gotten a lot weaker over the years, so she can't really handle it anymore. And I was like, it's like 10 times worse than anything you ever seen and saw. And that's saying something, which is crazy. And I was just shocked. I was like, damn, I never thought like they could push the envelope this hard, and they did. Like, this is.
And that makes me wonder what Damien Leone did to get to that, because largely a lot of times when you hear these directors talk on like behind the scenes and commentaries, they go balls out. And then with the assumption that the MPAA or Motion Pictures Association is going to say, all right, this has got to go, this has got to go, this has got to go.
Right.
Because it's almost like they've got to tell you something's got to go. So you go balls out. That way they cut what you expect them to cut. And then you have the product that you were intending, that was your first intention.
Yeah.
What did they cut, if of anything? I haven't heard that they did.
I don't think they did, because Terrifier 3, I don't know if 2 and 1 were X-rated, but 3 is rated X. So.
Oh, it is. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and it's now it's the highest grossing X-rated film ever made. And yeah, and So I don't think they had to cut anything out because they're like, fine, make it X-rated. I don't care. You know?
Yes, yeah, that makes perfect sense because
Mhm.
to keep the R rating, they can take it out, but if it's X, there is the gloves are off. So that makes perfect
Yeah.
sense. I did not
Mhm.
realize it was an X rating.
Yep. X-rated.
How many other films are X rated?
I don't know. I don't know. There's probably quite a few, but and I think it's historically been that most X-rated movies don't really get too much popularity, you know. But Terrifier's damn popular. Art the Clown specifically, he's in a lot of memes and stuff. You see him all over the internet.
Yeah,
Yeah.
had that movie been a standalone movie, I would tend to agree with it. But I think the cult phenomenon the first one became, then you kind of have All Hallows Eve, which is an offset with that
Hmm.
same character. I think there's a sequel to that as well. Then part two was obviously very big. A lot of people were,
Hmm.
satisfied with part two and wanting more. You already had that clientele and that base build up that was going to see three at all cost.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So it's actually a brilliant move to say, all right, we got them now. We can just go balls out. We don't have to worry about any restrictions. People are going to see it because they know what they're coming to get. And the funny thing about when I seen two, I had my son with me.
Hmm.
He might have been 15 at the time. So maybe too young to see it. I don't know, but I always watch horror movies at a young age. So
Yeah.
I don't really have any reservations about my son.
15 seems all right. If you would have said 8, I've been like, whoa, buddy.
Yeah, no, it wasn't quite that young. It
Yeah.
was either 14 or 15. He was definitely a
Mhm.
teenager. But we go in and there's this older couple, probably in their 60s, about three or
Mhm.
four rows in front of us. I like to go to movies on Thursday nights, opening nights. Not a
Mhm.
ton of people go, especially on horror movies. I hate going in the weekends when there's a million people in there and everybody's talking and oohing and ah, and I can't hear shit.
Mhm.
I like going on Thursday nights. Not very crowded. And you could just tell from the opening bell that they didn't know what kind of movie they were in.
Mm.
I think they just went out on a date night and decided, hey, we'll check out this scary flick
Mhm.
because it's the only time I've ever seen people get up and genuinely walk out of a theater.
I can see it. I mean, it's definitely not for everyone.
Yeah.
Like
I mean,
I
to
wouldn't.
the woman wouldn't even look at the screen. She's holding her head down like this.
No, I bet. And it's funny because recently that is definitely the most gruesome or brutal thing, gory thing that I've ever seen. But recently, I remastered my American Psycho video, and I read the American Psycho book. I'll tell you right now, that book is insanely detailed in what it talks about Patrick doing to people.
Yeah.
Like 20 pages of just describing how to torture a woman. It's crazy. I was like, man, he just went all out in this one. Yeah. But on the horror note, have you seen the X trilogy? X, Pearl, and Maxine?
Is that where they're shooting the porn video?
Yeah, it's like it's
Yes.
the first
Yeah.
one's like a very inspired by
Yeah.
Texas Chainsaw
Very much Texas Chainsaw Massacre theme. Yes, I have seen that.
The first one's good. The third one was pretty good too. But Pearl, that's a amazing film. Like
Really?
not
I need to
even
watch
just yeah, and it's one thing that I very much appreciated about horror lately is that for a long time I feel like horror was seen as kind of a joke genre.
it. Yeah.
Like you'd say that was good for a horror movie, because it was on a different plane from other films. And there's very few horror movies that you're going to put up on with The Godfather. It's
Right.
a horror movie. But lately, horror movies have been becoming good movies. It's not just a horror movie; it's a damn good movie. Like Hereditary, The Witch, The Lighthouse, all that kind of stuff. And Pearl is a good movie, and Mia Goth's performance in that movie is one of the best performances I've ever seen. It's incredible. And there's this moment. Have you seen it? Have you seen
No, I
Pearl?
haven't. But feel free to talk.
I'm not going to spoil too much, but there's this point in the film where she goes on a monologue for like 8 minutes where she's just talking at the camera. And if she was any less of an exceptional actress, that could have been easily like a slog, a cringe-worthy scene. Like, oh my god, just monologue, get it over with. But it was so raw and like emotional, that monologue. It was one of the best pieces of acting I've ever seen. And I didn't want it to be over. I was like, keep going, girl. This is amazing. Like, and so I highly recommend Pearl if you haven't seen it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll definitely check that out. One of the last ones that I've seen that was an excellent film and I recommend is Smile too.
Yeah, I've heard a couple of my viewers have told me that too. I haven't seen Smile 1, but I've heard Smile 2 was good.
So it would be hard. I mean, as a horror movie viewer, I definitely recommend it. It would be hard for you as the content creator with the type of stuff you do to zone in because I mean, I guess not, but it's like they're inhibited. They see this tragic accident of somebody basically unalived themselves.
Mm-hmm.
But before this happens, these people are scared to death and they're cowering and they're looking up at something and they're contorting, and then all of a sudden they just stop, they get up like normal, they give this creepiest smile ever, and then they just unalive themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That person sees that, and then they've kind of now become the chased person by people that just smile at you.
Mm.
And what it does, you learn throughout the movie that once that happens, you have 7 days before this thing, whatever you want to call it, that inhibits these people, that you realize they're inhibited by them smiling, finally does it to you, and then makes you unalive yourself, and then it kind of continues on. And it takes the one thing, which is so brilliant about this movie. It takes the one thing that is supposed to be like, I guess, the biggest symbol of happiness, a smile.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And it makes it the creepiest fucking thing you ever seen. And there's this really key scene. I'm not giving away too much. It's not an ending or anything. In the first movie, the girl realizes she thinks she's losing her mind.
Mm-hmm.
But she's talking to her psychiatrist, and psychiatrist saying this, well, you could be doing this. And obviously they don't believe her. Could be doing this, could be doing this. And the scene's kind of getting in depth, and her phone rings and she looks, and it's a psychiatrist calling her phone.
Mm.
So she answers it, and she's like, hello. And she's like, hey, I'm sorry I'm running a little late for our meeting, but I should be there in about 10 minutes. And so it's obviously this music, and she kind of goes up, and the woman's that's on the couch, and it's just like,
oh, wow.
I
Nice.
mean, it's just my skin's crawling right now just talking about it.
Nice.
And the second one is fantastic, man. They didn't miss a beat. I might even say the second one was better than the first one.
Oh, wow.
That's great. It is great.
Cool.
It's got a little bit of a It Follows feel to it.
Oh, okay.
It Follows,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
kind of the same premise somewhat, not so much with the smile, but it's got those undertones to it. But it's definitely a good recommend.
Cool.
One video I want to ask you about that I haven't watched, so I'm kind of getting your take on it as you would tell me. You done one on Ghostface. Ghostface throughout the series is inhibited by a lot of different people.
Yeah.
So I didn't watch that one yet. How did you go about that? What was your method with doing that, since it was inhibited by a lot of different people?
Yeah, so it's pretty convoluted, so I'm probably going to get some details wrong. But Stu Macher and what's the other guy's name? Billy
Loomis.
Billy Loomis. Yeah. It seems like I more so talked about, like, I talked about each character that was Ghostface and why they did what they did as Ghostface. But I think I more so talked in that video about how, like, these people use the Ghostface persona as an excuse to do things, and it's never justified when they use it. It's just something that some of them feel is justified. That's the right thing to do. I think in the fourth one, was it the fourth one where they wanted to just be like famous?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Kids or whatever.
Yeah. Like there's not even a shred of justification for that one. At least with some of the other ones, it was like, all right, tragic stuff's going on. You're taking on this persona. Yeah, I think I more so talked about how a persona like that can enable people, and make them do things like that, or give them an excuse or a path to doing something like that,
And in Billy's case, it was that Cindy's mom was banging his dad, which was why his mom left. And basically I guess that was, the main focal point of the parental household that he was at. He was obviously, I guess, much closer with his mother. Now she obviously winds up being the killer in part 2. Mm-hmm. But in 1, that's what he said. Your slut mother was banging my father. That's why my mom run off and abandoned me. Yeah. So he's using that. I think Stu obviously is psychologically manipulated by Billy to help with this, and he enjoys what he's doing.
Right.
Yeah. And it was great because I remember that was like one of the first movies that I rewatched because it was a great movie. It kind of transcended horror, in my opinion.
Mhm.
But you knew that there was two different killers. So I'm watching. I'm like, all right, so this one's probably Stu at this point. This one's probably Billy at this point. You try to break it down and pick,
Yeah.
who's who. Yeah,
No, and it's cool because this channel has actually opened me up to a lot of stuff that I hadn't seen before. I'd say at this point now, 30% of the videos I've done are stuff that I've seen prior, and then the rest is all new stuff to me. And when I was younger, my mom was very protective over us, and we didn't get to watch horror movies like at all. So, and I never developed an interest in horror when I was younger. I was more so into like fantasy and stuff and sci-fi. Um, so when I got older and I did have the opportunity to watch them on my own, I was like, not my thing. So now that I've been watching them all, I've been having a good time. It's been great. I hadn't seen any Nightmare on Elm Street movies, Friday the 13th, Chucky, anything really until the last few years. So it's been pretty cool.
I'll touch on that one for a minute because I actually just watched. It was a 5-hour documentary called The Cult of Chucky or The Curse of Chucky, and it basically broke down every movie in the entire series with people, from each movie talking. And I think there was a lot of stuff with the script in that one that was written a certain way. Tom Holland come in, he rewrote a lot of stuff. He added the voodoo aspect into the doll. I think that was sort of cutting edge, in my opinion, on you had to really work to make something that small and that innocent be something that terrified you.
Yeah. And it's funny, as expansive as the Child's Play franchise is, because I just did the Chucky video this past month, and it was a really short video because when I was writing the script, I was like, there isn't really much here as far as motivation goes.
Yeah.
Chucky wants to come back to life and he wants to kill people. That's about it. And you know what? Sometimes that's fine. It doesn't need to be convoluted. It's a great franchise, and horror. Sometimes the best part about horror is it's just good old fashioned fun.
Yeah.
You're not thinking, when I was watching those Child's Play movie, I wasn't thinking like, oh, what's Chucky's deeper motivations? I was like thinking, what's the next funny thing he's going to say next, and how is he going to kill someone in some elaborate way next? That's the focus of those movies. And so, yeah, it was interesting. Sometimes that happens. You mentioned earlier on that some of my videos are short and some of them are long, and they're only as short or as long as they need to be, in my opinion. And so as a franchise that has 10 movies, could it be a 2-hour video or it could be a 10-minute one? It just depends on the character and how it shakes out.
Well, I think it's like you get so much of a brief appearance of, was it Charles Lee Ray?
Right.
I think was his name in the first one. Then he immediately goes into the doll. So it's kind of like the whole thing after that is him trying to get out of the doll to get back to a body.
Yeah.
And like you said, essentially there's not a lot of motive. It's just he's trying to get back out.
Yeah. And get back out to do what? So he can keep killing more people. That's his whole reason to be. So,
yeah. Michael Myers. You can go a lot in depth on him. And I enjoyed when I think they got into part 5, and part 5 wasn't my favorite movie of the series by any means. But I did like in 5 and 6 when they started getting into a little bit more of his background. You kept seeing that guy with the boots and the little silver tab on the boots, and the guy that broke him out of jail at the end of it. What's your take on Michael Myers? Why he does what he does?
So, I was actually planning on remastering my Michael Myers video this year, but I just ran out of time. And so I've seen up to 5, and I've also I haven't seen all 3 of the newer ones, but I've seen the first 2.
Okay.
And I don't know, I could be wrong because I haven't seen them all, but it does seem like they really lean into the idea that Michael is, like, in many ways a demon. He's possessed by something. If not, he's just evil himself, like he was born with this insane evil inside of him or something. I don't know if you've seen all of them. What do you think? Is it more so that he's just like is he possessed by someone? Is he just a demon?
He's that one guy, man, that you really can't put a finger on. Everybody has this backstory that's evident of why they are the way they are. Jason was this kid who drowned because counselors were too busy getting it on, and now he's out for revenge. Freddy was a child predator, got freed on technicality. The townspeople burn him up, and now he's, going back, taking all their kids for revenge. You never really get the full story on why Michael is the way he is, what made him that way. I mean, obviously Donald Pleasant's character in the early movies, he's pure evil. Look him in those eyes. I mean, so you get that he's supernatural is not the right word, I don't think, to come off what he is, but he definitely seems to be impervious to anything you do to him.
Right. He's like supernatural adjacent. He's like Superman in a way. You can't do anything to him. He never dies, Yeah.
I mean, he can be seemingly, I guess, hurt or affected would be the better way. He's affected by things, but not hurt by them.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah.
And the third one, I didn't like the way the third one wrapped up. I like the first one, the ones that Danny McBride did in the 20, I guess that would be 2020s. I liked the first two. They were both good. The third one was okay. I just didn't like the way they wrapped it up, but I thought it was well acted. It just, I don't know. It wasn't the resolution I was looking for to wrap up that franchise. If you'll see it, you'll kind of get what I don't want to give away too much, but it just wasn't what I was hoping for. I had higher hopes for it, but especially since the first two were so good. And I could be in the minority on that. I'm not sure, but that's kind of.
I saw something about that, how the third one was disappointing. So I think you're in the majority actually on that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's just because you've got this long standing figure that's stood the test of time, and, you want to see a good resolution. And is it the resolution? He's died how many times?
Right.
And let's face it, horror movies is a genre that are just going to generate money because people like being scared.
Yeah.
And especially if you have a character, if you come out with a Freddy or a Jason or another Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie, even if the movie's shit, it's probably going to make some money.
Yeah.
People just like it. And it's nostalgic. And those are like your Mount Rushmore of horror people.
Right.
I'll close out with this one guy, and it's kind of jumping off horror. But I'm really curious as to hear your thoughts on this, especially kind of the end of it.
Okay.
Derek Vineyard from American History X.
Oh, okay.
And I know that's kind of a jump back, but I actually interviewed Frank Mink. You know who that is?
Say that again.
Frank Mink.
Frank Mink. No, I don't know who that is.
So it's alleged that he is the basis of American History X.
Oh, okay.
He's got a very paralleled story. Obviously the curb stomping is not in that was movie effect, but he told me verbatim. He said, I had some guys come and talk to me and basically get a report of my life, get a detailed account of my life. He's like, so is this my movie? No, it is not my movie. Does this movie mimic my life? Yes. A lot of things about it. So it's basically, they got all his info, but they didn't full bore say this is based on your life. I guess if that makes any sense. But the arc of that is like, you have this young kid who's very impressionable by his teacher, Sweeney. Then he has this terrible tragedy where his father dies. And you can tell there's a little bit of racism maybe in his father when they're sitting at the dinner table.
And it's I actually had someone push back on me on this when I made the video. I remember them messaging me on Instagram talking about how like his dad never did anything to make him the way he was. And I was like, well, in the scene at the dinner table, he called what he was teaching him in school N-word bullshit, and I mean, seems a little influential if you ask me. So, so his dad was definitely a little racist, and then his dad died. Was it saving black people?
Yeah, he was in a neighborhood or a crack house or something like that. He goes in to save him, and then he dies in the fire. And then you see in that flashback, I don't know if he was being interviewed, where he's like, he died saving these people where he shouldn't even have been to begin with. Obviously, he said some other choice words that I'm not going to repeat.
Right.
That's kind of the beginning of his trajectory into that life of hate.
Yeah.
And then obviously he becomes the de facto leader of the group, outside of he's being led by Cameron, who was played by Stacey Keach, who was brilliant.
Right.
Then, obviously he has the situation where he goes to jail. Now, Frank said that they did kidnap essentially two people they weren't even black. I think they were Hispanic. and they beat him, they tortured him, they filmed it. They didn't kill him, but they let him go. Then when they let him go, obviously they went to the cops. By the time the cops caught up with him, they had the tape, so it was kind of like it was hard to fight. And he wound up going to prison and doing some time. And then inside, he actually found out that he himself was Jewish. And it really changed his whole outlook of, hate and everything else. That's the, Frank Mink I'm referring to.
I see. Okay.
And Derek Vineyards, he kind of realizes that, maybe all black people aren't as bad as, I was made to think by Cameron.
Oh, yeah.
But then he gets out and he sees his brothers going down the wrong path. And I say all that to kind of get to the point of the meat and potatoes of this question. His brother gets killed at the end of the film. Spoiler alert. Hopefully you've seen that film, but does Derek go back into that life?
I doubt it. No, I wouldn't say so.
I
think Derek, even though his brother got killed, I think at that point, Derek has realized, he has come to a realization that is really hard for all of us to recognize a lot of the time, is that below everything that we are, all of us are all people. We're all human, and yeah, we're all different in different ways. But at the end of the day, what matters the most is that we are all human and that we all feel happiness. We all know what it's like to be happy. We all know what it's like to be sad. We know what it's like to be hungry. And we know what it's like to be full, And once you realize that people who are different from you aren't really so different at all, then you gain a greater understanding of empathy, and you can empathize with other people. And I think at the end of the story, Derek had gone down that path, and he knew then that what happened to his brother was tragic, and it was the same thing, pretty much the same thing that he went through, but it wasn't black people's fault. It wasn't the people who killed him. It was essentially Cameron Alexander's fault, for making him into who he is, because hate corrupts people into monsters. Hate is never good for anyone. I mean, anger is natural in a situation, but hate, I would say hate doesn't benefit you in any way, and the reason that hate is so potent a lot of the time is because, hate is not the opposite of love. Hate is a corruption of love, because if you hate something, you love something just as much, if not more,
Right.
Why would a white supremacist hate all other races? Because he loves the white race, and he wants what he thinks is best for the white race. So that's why he abides by hate. And no, I think Derek evolved, and I wouldn't say he'd go back at the end. I think he understands now that the problem was Cameron. Cameron is what led his brother to an early grave. It wasn't those kids, Yeah.
And there's that saying that he says, we are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Through passion may abstain. It must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic chords of memory will swell when again touched, as surely we will be by the better angels of our nature. And it was just such a powerful and moving film because, when he gets in prison, he realizes that the whole movement wasn't what he thought it was. And then obviously he pays a drastic price for that, but then he's essentially kept alive by the people that he was bred to hate. So you see such a drastic character arc of acceptance that they were of the wrong belief system. And then I guess the learning of, how people really are as opposed to what you were being fed. And the evil out of that whole movie would be Cameron Alexander.
Oh yeah, definitely. And when because I do, I do these tier list things because people like him, and I rank like all the villains that I've covered, and I throw Derek on there just because he has done some evil things. But when I rank Derek, I put him down towards the bottom, and Cameron's up at the top.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because and we were talking about this earlier. There's a difference between a person who does an evil thing, and there's a difference between an evil person. And Cameron Alexander is an evil person, and Derek Vineyard is a person who did evil things.
I couldn't have said it better, and I think that's a great way to end it. Man, I could talk to you all night about this. You've got an excellent channel.
Yeah.
Great content. Before we get out of here, tell everybody where they can go to find it, check you out, YouTube, social medias, all that good stuff.
So I am horrible at social media. I always have been. It's just not my thing. I don't know why. But you can find me on YouTube at the Vile Eye, and I post videos every week. And villains from everything: anime, manga, cartoons, TV, movies, real life, video games, books, you name it, you can find it there. So yeah, find me on YouTube at the Vile Eye.
Yeah, and we've only talked 2 hours, and we've only scratched the surface of everybody. I mean, I had a lot of names wrote down. Dexter. The Long Legs movie. That, I mean, there was just so much to cover, but otherwise, like I said, we'd be here all night. Before we get out of here, I do have a request. Well, I've already told you one, Jack Steller, but I have one more that I think would be a great arc, because it's that person that does bad shit, but he does it for a good reason. And Rip Wheeler from Yellowstone.
I've heard about Yellowstone. I've heard Yellowstone's great.
So I didn't watch Yellowstone. I've never watched it until about 2 months ago.
Okay.
And for some reason, I thought that character was not in it at the beginning. And I was like, this guy looks like somebody I would really like, but I don't know if I want to wait until he gets there. And then we put it on, and he's actually in there from the first episode. He's hands down my favorite character. I think he's got more of a powerful impact than Kevin Costner, me personally. And he's I think you would really, not only would you enjoy the series as a viewer, but I think you would enjoy his arc, because there's so much backstory of why he is the way he is, why he does the things he does, and obviously the relationship that he has with the owner's daughter, Kevin Costner's daughter. It's a fantastic series. So that would be my recommendation for you, Rip Wheeler, and hopefully we can catch that.
Sounds good. I'll check it out. You might be seeing it soon.
Thank you for stopping by the show, man. This is one of the best enjoyments of doing a podcast that I've had in quite a while. I enjoy doing them all the time, but when I can talk this kind of stuff and really get down to the deep and dark psychology of it, it just really makes doing this stuff worthwhile. So thank you very much for coming on the show.
It was my pleasure. It was a great time.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, now to wrap it up for this episode of Crime and Entertainment, go check out the Vile Eye. We'll see you next week on Crime and Entertainment. See you, my friend.
Everybody.